As for Exodus, they still cross the stage during their shows, but Slayer doesn't do a lot of running around and jumping off the steps. For the record, neither do I, because my knees hurt. I have a guitar. Do you mind that I have fire on stage? As an example, I learned to play the guitar when I was 17 years old. Before, Gary Holt played for two well-known thrash metal acts at the same time. When Jeff Hanneman died, Slayer was broken. Escape. Its strong desire for renewal is staggering. He carried both of them without taking a single day off. One was the weight of history, and the other was a heritage he built himself. He flew from Europe to the US, learned 20 Slayer songs all over again in just 48 hours, and then went on stage with eyes that were on fire for weeks at a time. He didn't get any complaints or requests, and no one knew why he did it. In all likelihood, not even he did. When it came to praise, Gary Holt was never compared to James Hetfield. Like Dave Mustaine, he didn't write songs that sold 1 million copies. There were no dragon tattoos or issues in the news about him. He was loyal to metal, though, which was something no one else had. There were no plans or deals. He never attempted to take over for Hanneman. He decided to stand in that empty space and roar through a bloody guitar. No give and take, no show, and no one else could take his place. Betrayal, fights, breakups, and walkouts are common in this genre, but Gary Holt lived like a defender of the ashes for 40 years without running away. His story is told here. He was a fighter who didn't need the attention. He just wanted to scream until the very end. Born on May 4, 1964, in Richmond, California, Gary Holt started his life. A working-class neighborhood in the San Francisco Bay Area where life was shaped by steel, oil, and crime. His 4 older siblings preceded him. His father worked in transportation, and his mother did cleaning and other odd jobs to make money for the family. They never went hungry, but they also never had a lot of food. Gary quickly learned that he had to keep quiet in order to stay alive in a house with 6 other kids. Not even weakness or resistance were allowed. He used to say that his childhood was organized chaos, with fights between brothers and between neighbors, and police showing up every day like it was nothing out of the ordinary. 6 kids were there, and 5 of them got into trouble by stealing, fighting, or being jailed. Just like everyone else, Gary stayed out of jail, but not the dark. He didn't have any figures of worship or a plan. For him, school was just a dull duty, a place to wait for the bell, and nothing else. Violence was almost always going to happen at the high school he went to in Richmond. Within his own family, Gary never imagined becoming anything or anyone. Finding his first guitar in a storage shed was the day that everything started to change for him. It was an old, rusty instrument with strings that were broken. It didn't have an amplifier or an instruction book. But as soon as he touched the fingerboard, he felt different. The feeling wasn't happiness, but a well-coordinated anger. I did not play because I loved it. According to him, I played because I would go crazy if I didn't. Playing audio tapes over and over and over again, Gary learned everything by breaking down riffs from bands like Motorhead, AC/DC, and Judas Priest. There were no teachers or places to practice. He improvised, remembering, with the stubbornness and loneliness of a child who didn't trust the world outside. He hit each note like hot steel being hit night after night in that tiny bedroom. Rough and slow, but very clear. Learning how to be an artist wasn't a trip. It was all about music to stay alive. Gary turned to a beat-up amplifier and a notebook full of riffs when his friends turned to drugs or gangs. Street fights were going on, but he locked himself in the garage to work on his skills. He hated talking in front of people and never wanted to be famous. Gary felt in charge for the first time in the soundtrack he made for himself. His anger never went away, but after that, it had a tune and a reason for being there. In his early years, Gary Holt never thought of himself as someone who would join Exodus. In his words, it was a planned accident. Tim Agnello quit the band for personal reasons in 1981 when he was only 17 years old. He was then brought into the band to fill in as guitarist. In the Bay Area underground scene at the time, Exodus was just a small name, but people who knew them already knew. They were playing something that had never been played before. They didn't even have a name for thrash metal back then. It was an unclear mix of fast-paced punk, angry metal, and a natural desire to hurt others. Things started to get stronger when Gary stepped in. He wasn't there to change the band. He was there to order the chaos and turn the aimless yelling into a useful tool. Gary brought to Exodus razor-sharp playing and well-organized riffs that turned knotted anger into a cold, cruel sound attack. He was more than just the player in less than a year. He started writing most of the songs for Exodus and helped shape the band's sound. Their first album, Bonded by Blood, was made in 1984 but didn't come out until 1985. It wasn't just the start of Exodus. It was a kind of fake birth certificate for thrash metal in the Bay Area. At that time, Bonded by Blood was the only record that really stood out. Metallica had just released Kill 'Em All, and Megadeth was still getting their feet under them. A real feeling of being threatened. There is no finish, no giving in, and no trying to please everyone. The reason Gary Holt wrote songs was not to make money. It seemed like he was writing down the last screams of people who had been eaten up by society. Some songs, like Strike of the Beast and A Lesson in Violence, were more than just songs. They were like threats from people who had nothing to lose. They are ready to fight back with strings and new blood. But it wasn't easy to be successful. Even though Exodus was highly regarded in the underground, they were constantly delayed, didn't get enough attention, and were quickly lost in the commercial race. While Metallica was on top, Exodus was having a rough time because of bad contracts, band changes, and missed chances. Gary continued. In fact, being left behind made him stronger, more angry, and more devoted to the music he picked. He didn't write to adhere to fads. He wrote like he was daring the world outside. Pop, hair metal, and even other thrashers who were changing their sound. From 1985 to the early 1990s, Exodus put out a number of records. Pleasures of the Flesh, published in 1987. Great Disaster, 1989. Impact is About to Happen, 1990. Even though none of them were business bombs, they all proved something to be true. The thrash flame was kept living in its purest form by Gary Holt, who did not let anyone else touch it. At a time when colors were often changing, he chose not to. Good luck with Exodus. If thrash metal is a battlefield, Gary Holt is the soldier who never got up, even when the wounds healed and the cheers of success stopped. During more than 40 years, he has been the only constant in every part of Exodus, from the very beginning to the very end. Not just the main guitarist, but also the band's leader, codebreaker, and lifeblood. Holt solidified his unbeatable position as lead guitarist and main songwriter for the band, starting with Bonded by Blood in 1985. Underground metal fans praised this album as one of the foundations of thrash metal because of its lightning-fast speed, vicious riffs, and wild words. It was songs like Bonded by Blood, Piranha, and A Lesson in Violence that set the tone for the style that Exodus would stick to for decades. Holt didn't play to turn heads. He played like it was the only way to keep his mind straight in a world that was falling apart. After that came Pleasures of the Flesh, 1987. With Steve Zetro Souza taking over for Paul Bailoff. Even though the record wasn't a big hit, it cemented Exodus's place in the Bay Area thrash wave, especially since they went on tour with Anthrax, Slayer, and Testament, all of whom were on the verge of becoming worldwide stars. Fabulous Disaster, 1989, which included songs like The Toxic Waltz, Fabulous Disaster, and Corruption, was a turning point. That record was Exodus's first to get noticed outside of the thrash underground. The band went on promotional trips all over Europe and South America, and they even made some big TV appearances. It was the closest Exodus ever got to being popular, but Holt still refused all offers to soften the sound so it would be easier to play on the radio. Impact is Imminent, released in 1990, was the first album of the 1990s. It was more complicated and technically advanced than its predecessor, but it didn't hold as much appeal for a bigger audience. With songs like Thrash Under Pressure and Only Death Decides, Holt started putting more emphasis on technical guitar work in his compositions. This showed that he was not only the master of riffs, but also the band's complete musical planner. This album came out in 1992. This is likely their most controversial record. The band Exodus slowed things down, welcomed grooves, and leaned toward other styles. Many fans were let down, but Holt said it was important to test the limits. Even so, the record did badly in both sales and reviews. Exodus quietly broke up in 1993 when thrash was dying out and grunge was taking over. There was no news or goodbye. Holt wrote music for almost 10 years, even though he didn't play much. He got back together with Paul Bailoff and other ex-members of Exodus in 1997 to bring the band back to the stage. When they started recording again in 2001, Bailoff suddenly died of a stroke. It was a terrible hit. Meanwhile, Holt kept working with Steve Souza and in 2004 released Tempo of the Damned. This is one of the best thrash records of the last 10 years. Thrash was still alive and well thanks to songs like Blacklist, War is My Shepherd, and Throwing Down. It had just been waiting for someone brave enough to bring it back to life. After that, there was a time of aggressive technical testing. In 2005, Shovel-Headed Kill Machine released a new album with a more modern death thrash sound and a whole new band. The most violent records Holt had ever written were Exhibit A, Atrocity Exhibition, which came out in 2007, and Exhibit B, The Human Condition, which came out in 2010. Lyrics that are politically charged against war and religion, with complicated linked riffs, long song lengths, and unusual structures. Even though Exodus was almost no longer stuck in standard thrash molds, it still had all of its anger and defiance. After splitting up with Rob Dukes in 2014, Holt asked Zetro Souza to join the band again. This was a controversial move, but it made the band's lineup more stable. The record became a tribute to thrash's early days when Kirk Hammett, who used to be in Exodus and is now the lead guitarist for Metallica, played on Salt the Wound. Holt proved that he could embrace his roots without losing his modern edge. No Good Person, 2021. Released during the pandemic, they had Holt's fingerprints on them. It was cold, technically difficult, and had lyrics that spoke to the social chaos in America. It was Exodus's first record that Holt and drummer Tom Hunting recorded themselves. People thought Persona Non Grata was one of the best thrash records of the year, even though it wasn't given much attention. It showed that Holt could still play like he was in his 50s. Gary Holt has been on every Exodus record, tour, and resurrection for more than 40 years. He's played thousands of shows in almost 60 countries, from crowded Oakland clubs to Wacken Open Air, Hellfest, and huge Latin American events. Although he never made Exodus a big hit, he kept it living, fierce, unwavering, and true to itself. It wasn't important to be more famous than other people to be successful. It was about staying alive longer than everyone else and staying true to yourself. When founding guitarist of Slayer Jeff Hanneman suddenly left the stage in 2011 because of a necrotizing fasciitis infection from a spider bite, many people thought it was just a short-term setback. But his situation got worse over time. Slayer, one of the big four shows that couldn't be moved, was stuck between continuing and stopping. They finally decided to move forward, but only with someone who could carry the weight that seemed impossible to replace. Gary Holt did not sign up to be a Slayer. A friend, an admired musical rival, and an icon that no one wanted to replace, Jeff Hanneman. He was the last person who wanted to become like him. Still, Holt didn't say no when Kerry King called. He knew how important this choice was and what it would cost because he had been a Slayer fan since the early 1980s. From 2011, Gary went on world trips with Slayer. At first, Holt was just a temporary fill-in, but when Hanneman died in 2013 of liver failure caused by years of drinking too much, he was the only person who could keep Slayer going without changing what it stands for. The most significant part? Not ever did he try to be Hanneman. Holt didn't want to write new songs or change the old ones to fit his own way. He learned all 20 songs on Slayer's set list in less than 48 hours so he could play on their European tour. From Angel of Death to Raining Blood and South of Heaven to Disciple, Gary played without adding to or taking away from the music, making mistakes, or changing the tone of his playing. Instead of showing off his skill or speed, he stuck to Hanneman's attitude of being simple, exact, and brutal. From 2011 to 2019, Gary Holt played more than 300 shows with Slayer. He never yelled into the mic or tried to be the center of attention, but his presence stopped the band from breaking down emotionally after their biggest loss. Holt was an official member of Slayer until Repentless, 2015, but he didn't help write any of the songs on that record. All the music was written by Kerry King. It was written by Tom Araya. Holt himself made that choice. He didn't want Exodus Extended to turn into Slayer. For respect, he didn't write to get famous. For the fans, Hanneman, and the band, Holt divided his time between two fronts during this time. As a member of Exodus, I managed the band, wrote songs, recorded albums, and handled lineup changes while touring the world with Slayer, playing small venues in Europe and huge festivals like Wacken, Hellfest, and Rock in Rio. The majority of his friends stopped working or retired, but Holt lived two lives and never gave up. Once he said, "I'm not tired anymore. I just know how to play right and play until my hands will not move." Gary Holt helped Slayer finish their last few songs, but they still had problems within the band. "I Want to Leave," Tom Araya. King Carey was determined to keep going. Holt was in the middle of them. When Slayer said they were breaking up after the last campaign tour in 2019, Holt quietly nodded and stepped back, just like he did when they started. Throughout the whole thing, he never said that he was a Slayer member. He never made a fuss, said thanks, or needed praise. He told them that Slayer fans were split. Others would only accept Hanneman. Others agreed that Holt was the only person who could do that job without sullying it. Nobody denied this, though. After Hanneman left the band, Slayer would not have been around for 8 more years without Gary Holt. That wasn't Holt's job. It was to carry the load. Not a lot of noise or attention, just enough to keep the fire going in a band that was falling apart. Through everything he did with Exodus, Holt didn't look for praise. He just did what had to be done, even if it made him tired. Pain and loss. When Slayer broke up at the end of 2019, Gary Holt left the stage in the way that was his trademark. There were no speeches, performances, or tears. He ended the part of a journey he had never planned to take, but did so for one reason: to keep the flame burning for someone who was no longer with us. But he didn't stop when the lights went out and the last riff of Angel of Death ended. You could still see Exodus. And, as he had done for more than 40 years, Gary came back. This time, his body was tired, his mind was tough from hundreds of tour nights, and his band was ready for him to take the load one more time. However, this time the weight could be seen. A plague hit the world not long after Slayer's last tour. At the beginning of 2020, Gary and Lisa got COVID-19 while visiting Europe with Exodus. He had high fevers, coughed constantly, and couldn't sleep while he was in quarantine, so he had to cancel all of his remaining shows. Not by choice, but because his body told him to. He had to stop for the first time in decades. Holt simply said, "I used to think I didn't know what tired felt like after he got better. The bug then made me realize how weak I was." A short time later, there was another blow. Holt has been friends with Exodus's drummer, Tom Hunting, since the 1980s. Hunting was recently struck with stomach cancer. Gary didn't think about it. He put all of his personal projects on hold, started funding efforts, and wrote music at home while waiting for Tom to get better. He also put off recording Persona non grata. People thought it was a good thing to do. But for Holt, it was the only thing that made sense, since the music wouldn't matter without the brothers. There was a lot of quiet, heavy pressure at the time. Persona non grata wasn't written by Gary because he was excited. He wrote it because he was in the mood of someone coming out of war, taking care of a dying friend, and getting better from a world illness. It wasn't as fiery as Pace of the Damned or as loud as Fabulous Disaster. It was colder and tastier, and a question kept coming back to mind. There are how many times I can play like it's the last time left? In the same time, old cracks in Exodus started to show up again. Long-standing problems with former lead singer Rob Dukes sometimes made the news again. Some old fans said that Holt was too controlling because he could change band members at will and brought Zetro Souza back right away. Others said he was to blame for chasing Slayer and not paying attention to Exodus. Gary was writing songs for Exodus late at night while playing for hundreds of thousands of people with Slayer, but not many people knew this. Don't do it for fame or money. Only for one reason, though: he didn't know how to stop. Even though Gary Holt was at the center of Exodus for years, the media never paid attention to him. He didn't make a fuss. He did not give out crazy views. People went crazy when he wore a Kill the Kardashians shirt on stage with Slayer, though. Some people thought it was a harsh attack on trash media culture. Some people said it was violently provocative. Gary did not answer. Not want apologies or explanations. In a world that was louder and more reactive than ever, Holt chose silence, just like he had done before. One thing Gary Holt never learned was how to do it. We need to stop. Even though he was getting hurt, misunderstood, and criticized, he kept going. That could be the worst thing that ever happened to him. Others quit their jobs, wrote books, or went on talk shows. But Holt kept playing, writing, and changing strings and packing pedals after every show as if it were the last time he'd ever be able to play anything. In an industry where artists often give up on what they once created, Gary Holt is still the thinner, more worn-out man who holds on to his guitar like it's his only tool. And maybe, just maybe, all the pain in the world has chosen to find him because he won't run away. Personal life. Gary Holt is one of the meanest guitarists in thrash metal, but he won't join the booze, women, and general chaos that happens behind the scenes when the lights go down, the drums stop playing, and the crowd leaves. To avoid any disturbances, he will quietly unplug his equipment, fold his stage clothes neatly, and go back to his room, where his wife is waiting with cold food and a letter from his daughter sent from across the country. Holt lives with his wife of many years, Lisa Holt. Lisa doesn't go on stage or talk to the press, but she is always with him on tour. In a world where musicians change all the time and reunions end after a few months, Gary's partner has never changed. Lisa took care of him while he had COVID-19, helped him off stage when he was too tired to walk, and made him his first dinner after the Slayer tour was over. They have 2 kids together, and Gary talks about his daughter Emily Holt a lot on social media, but not in a brag or a nostalgic way. Through quiet posts about how she was growing up, the time they spent apart, and the holidays they missed because he was on tour. He once said that the thing he regretted most in his life wasn't records that he hadn't finished, but birthdays and other important events that he could only remember through pictures. When Holt isn't making songs, he only likes animals and cooking. He has small animals like dogs, cats, and chickens that aren't always useful to the world. Gary sees them as a sign of life and precious peace. He once shared a picture of his cat sleeping on his amplifier with the words, "It knows the safest place in the house." In the California suburb where Gary Holt lives, between a small studio and a yard, he grills barbecue every week like it's nothing, just like setting up his pedals before a show. He does not smoke or drink too much, and he has not gone down the destructive paths that are popular in the metal scene. Gary has stayed clean and clear-headed while his friends have messed up rehab or died alone in hotel rooms. It's not because he's stronger, but because he chose not to go that route. "I'm not perfect," he said, "but I stay away from the things that kill people slowly." Holt's ease of expression isn't a clever trick. He's kept himself together through all the years, screams, lights, blood, and pain. The goal of many people's lives is to be known, but Gary Holt's goal is to never forget who he is when he's not playing guitar. His autobiography, appearances on big talk shows, and biopic pitches have all been unsuccessful. But if someone ever tells his story, it might only take one line. Despite the chaos going on around him, he played fair, lived honestly, and kept his house standing. Life now and tomorrow. Gary Holt turned 60 in 2024. Many metal artists from his time have retired at this point, using memoirs, music fairs, or well-planned reunion tours to relive the good old days. However, Gary doesn't live in the past. He still writes riffs, puts new pickups on his guitars, does left-hand runs every morning, and roars like Exodus is still going on. Holt went back to focusing on Exodus full-time after Slayer broke up. Persona non grata came out in 2021 during the pandemic and got great reviews from reviewers, both for how well it was made technically and for having dark, politically charged lyrics. A very small number of metal bands released new albums when they were 60 years old, and even fewer were able to keep the raw spirit they had 40 years ago. Gary did a great job. No marketing tricks or public relations. It's just music and harsh truth. Those days, he lived in California with amps, cats, and old comic books. He mostly writes songs, fixes guitars, posts barbecue pictures on Instagram, and stays in touch with fans by responding to every comment, sometimes with the middle finger emoji that has become his signature. Even though he's not the kind of rock star who tries to be inspiring, he does it anyway. Reformers are not Gary Holt. He didn't come up with thrash metal, but he made sure it lived on in its original, unaltered form. Holt is the best example of a genre that is all about resistance, rebellion, and not giving in. Holt is known as the line keeper, while other famous musicians are called icons, masters, or gods. How many kids learned his riffs in garages is a better way to measure his impact than how many records he sold. It's not the numbers that matter, but how many bands today say, "We wouldn't exist without being bound by blood or the tempo of the damned." Holly doesn't preach any ideas, but the way he stays calm, polite, and steady shows younger artists that making art doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it's enough to just stay alive and keep the fire going. There is no rock and roll hall of fame for him. He isn't Grammy winning. He is not the subject of a documentary. On the other hand, this is true for any metal fan who has really lived the music, that is, listened, screamed, and lost their voice in the dance pit. Gary Holt is one of the few riff leaders who has never betrayed it. Today, deals, views, and likes can be used to buy almost anything. But Gary Holt is the only thing that can't be bought. That may be the most important thing he leaves behind. What do you think about Gary Holt's almost 50-year journey from garage musician to the iconic lead singer of Exodus and Slayer? What catches your eye the most? His devotion, his toughness as a musician, or his inability to ever give in? Tell us what you think in the space below. Also, please like and follow if you think artists like Gary Holt should get more attention. Find new legends who play honestly, live honestly, and stay honestly. Thanks for seeing this. Keep watching the next movie.